Hello Internet, welcome back to another week and another book review. This time it is Hannu Rajaniemi's collection Invisible Planets, and if you want to hear a proper pronunciation of the name, I will leave a link down below to the Finnish booktuber Maya Reads, who as a Finnish person can properly pronounce his name. But anyway, pronunciation aside, this is a collection of Rajaniemi's short fiction works. And you might know him, he's quite popular through his very hard sci-fi trilogy, The Quantum Thief. Well, I think the trilogy might be called officially the Jean Le Flambeur trilogy, but Quantum Thief is the first book in that series, very well known. But this is a collection of Rajaniemi's short fiction writing. So we get a collection of short fiction stories. A number of them are science fiction in kind of the same vein as The Quantum Thief. They could possibly be in the same universe, it's not entirely clear, but they deal with a lot of the same concepts. So we get exotic quantum mechanics, we get a lot of AI, mind uploading, post-humanism, themes like that in there. But then interspersed we get a whole bunch of fantasy stories based on, as far as I can tell, Finnish folklore. Right, so you get various old Finnish deities who play a role, and basically stories involving magic and the supernatural, setting what otherwise could be our world rather than the futuristic stories of Rajaniemi's novel trilogy. We also get at the end two other types of stories, which one is his neurofiction experiment, he calls it, and the other one is a collection of microfiction. So the neurofiction experiment was originally run at a science fair in Edinburgh, where Rajaniemi got his PhD in quantum mechanics. And the point of that neurofiction experiment was kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book, right? But then instead of people consciously choosing, they were connected to an electroencephalogram, so a machine that read their brainwaves, and then based on that it would select which story you would then read as participant in this. So that's kind of hard to reproduce in just a book format like this, of course. So in the end we get a story which is a retelling of Snow White, and that story we get is kind of the overall average sequence of story that was selected for people. So it's still an enjoyable retelling of Snow White, but I do think you're missing part of the experience, of course. Obviously you are, by not having that neurofiction aspect to it. And the other aspect is the microfiction. So this is a collection of tweets he wrote, where each tweet is or a collection of a couple of tweets forms a short story. Those were nice, but I think other people have done that format better, and I'll leave a link below to one of my favorite Twitter accounts. Off the top of my head I'm going to say MicroSF, that tweets, that writes Twitter-length short stories. Other than that, I did enjoy this collection. So we have a nice mix of both hard sci-fi, right? And if you've read Rajaniemi's books, you'll kind of know a bit what to expect in that terms. It's definitely not for, I'd say, beginners in sci-fi. Right, there's very little exposition, and you know, all kinds of quantum mechanics concepts are just flung at you without explanation. So if you are into quantum mechanics, you don't have to actually have studied it, but you know, at least if you've read some popular science books on it, or you know, watch some of the great science YouTubers out there who explain these concepts, and you can probably follow what's going on. If you've read other sci-fi dealing with these kind of tropes, right, AI, singularity, mind uploads, things like that, you can also probably figure out what's going on. But if it's your first foray into the genre, I would advise you to pick a different author. Right? It's not to say it's bad, absolutely not. It is good hard sci-fi, but I can see what would be hard to get into, and if you are new to the genre, you'd have no clue what was going on. But then interspersed with that, so we also get these fantasy stories. It's very nice to see that Rajaniemi can kind of do both. And even his hard sci-fi, which is a subgenre which quite often tends to be very ideas focused, right? It's about, developing these concepts, extrapolating the science, and then making sure all the science and the physics is correct, but sometimes at the expense of characterization and the human experience. But Rajaniemi, I think, manages to preserve that, especially in the second story, Relate the Server and the Dragon, which is a story so far post-human. It doesn't feature any human characters at all. It only features AIs, but it still has a kind of very fairy tale-like quality. It still is I almost want to say humanity to the characters, although they are definitely not humans. And there's more of these stories that kind of contain these fairy tale aspects, even though they are about post-humans, about AI beings, kind of suggesting that these stories are really fundamental to our human experience and our personalities as humans, so that even if we do end up becoming just software running on planetoid-sized computers, somehow it will remain part of the structure of our brain and or our minds and of our thoughts. So I thought it's very interesting, and it's nice to see how he manages to combine kind of these hard sci-fi concepts, but still adding in that touch of humanity and of the humanities, let's say, not just purely the hard physics and quantum mechanics. Also, I think kind of looking at a common thread, what connects the stories, even though there are two kind of separate genres, right? There's no stories that really blur the genres. I would say that each story you can point to, this is a sci-fi story, this is a fantasy story. So you could make a very clear division based on that, but at the same time, there's a very much a connection through the themes. I think most of the stories deal with death and the desire to avoid death, with immortality and the afterlife, whether that's through people uploading their minds in the hope of gaining immortality that way, or through the effect that we have on people that come after us, even if our mind as such is not existing anymore, or whether it's through supernatural means to try and extend their life, or to cope with death or understand what comes after death. So that's kind of what binds, I think, the whole collection together. It's quite interesting to see very different perspectives on that same theme. I think in the end, so it's quite a few stories I enjoyed reading the book as such, but there are no, I think, really outstanding stories that I really remember even afterwards. Although my favorite, I definitely still recommend reading it, but it's not the greatest short story collection ever, let's say. But my favorite of the stories in there is, double check, the title is Paris in Love, which takes the idea of falling in love with a place and turns it on its head. And I'm not going to spoil that any further, you'll just have to read it yourself if you want to find out. And then finally, at the end of this book, we get a little peek into Summerland, which is the new novel coming out. And I think in the book it still said it's going to be coming out in 2017. It didn't. It's now, I think, going to come out June this year. And definitely looking forward to that. Looks really interesting. Complete break from the previous novels Rajaniemi wrote. So where that was really hard sci-fi, this seems to be set in kind of alternative 20s or 30s of the 20th century, but with some occultism thrown in. There's a secret agent who uses an ectophone and seems to be connecting via some kind of occult or ethereal plane. So it looks really interesting. Can't wait for that to come out. And in the meantime, I think that's more or less all I have to say about this collection. So yeah, if you liked the Quantum Thief trilogy, then I can definitely recommend the short stories. You'll find kind of more short stories examining some of the themes and the things you brought up in the Quantum Thief, although in the Quantum Thief trilogy it does go a lot more in depth in exploring the various questions. If you would like to read some stories with more Finnish slant, which is of course not something you see a lot, if you're interested in Finnish folklore and what a fantasy writer can do with that, also definitely recommend it. If it's your first foray into science fiction and fantasy, maybe at least brush up on some quantum mechanics first and some ideas about mind uploads and singularity. If you don't know what the singularity is, probably you don't have all the background knowledge you need to fully appreciate this book. But yeah, that's it for me for this week. Next week I probably won't have a review because I'm currently reading A Little Life, which is anything but little, and as you can see I'm not even halfway yet. But I'll find hopefully something else to do. I'm thinking about doing the BookTube newbie tag sometime soon. So hopefully you'll join me again for that. But for now, that's it for me. Happy reading and see you next time. Bye bye.